Diversity Program Manager with PPB, and I'm really excited to be here today. So we'll see how I do with managing my sheets. Okay, thank you.
Can't be thirsty.
Okay, I got you. All right. So if you can go forward, I wanted to just first start off by saying thank you for having, I say us just because the work, is never done alone. But I realize I am the only person from the equity office standing here. But you will hear we and us and the group. But we're really excited to be invited here because it's so important that this work is connected to the work that you're doing, and that the equity work and centering racial equity and developing your community engagement and outreach plan, they're in full alignment. So we're excited to be here to be able to provide an overview to you all and then continue the engagement. Okay, and so today we were asked to kind of give the overview. And so we're hoping just to quickly go over, the EDO structure, give some highlights of our REP, and then talk about next steps, and then open it up for questions. Does that sound good? Yes?
Could we have a rule where whenever you use one of those acronyms, you say what it is?
Can you go to the next page? So yes.
Nice.
And I was so annoyed when I joined, like the city, all the acronyms that we throw around, and I've become it. So we recognize. So when you see CHO, that's the chief's office. EDO, I know I will say that's the Equity and Diversity Office. You see PPB, obviously, police, and then our REP, Racial Equity Plan. You'll see those two going back and forth. But yes, if there's something I missed, I will spell it out. Thank you. All right, if you can click again. So we thought it was important just to kind of talk about our structure. So where we are situated, we are set up in strategic services, which is made up of our analysts who work on DOJ projects and what have you. And so we report to Captain Osenkop, who reports to AC Davis. So we're a part of the services branch. And so that's where we sit. You can click. And you'll see that we are a team of 3. So we've grown. So for 3 years, it was just myself. And then we've grown where we've added a program specialist. And now we also will have an equity social science analyst, which is exciting. So we wanted to talk a little bit about our framework for our office and the REP and our methodology. So you'll see 2 sides of this, and I feel like the red isn't as visible, but our work is guided by so many pieces, right? And it's important that we incorporate it. So you have some of the policing directives and what we say are city and federal directives, if you can. So one is obviously 21st century policing pillars. Those 6 pillars are what we used and made sure we consider as we were developing and going through our assessment process. The Bureau's 3 goals, right, of crime reduction and crime prevention and reduction, organizational excellence, and community engagement and inclusion. So those are our goals. They are a priority of the chief and part of what drives our work. And then, of course, being connected to the citywide goals that OEHR is driving across all 26 bureaus. So it's important that we see ourselves not only working internally, but that we see ourselves working collaboratively across the city as well. And then, of course, part of our work is around, we're in the strategic planning process, which I believe most of you guys probably would be aware of. And so our work will align. You'll see complementary information, and also my office manages the affirmative action plan. So it's important that our plans and our work is, they're talking, right? So our framework, you'll note on the left with the circle going around, those are our 8 priorities. So the first one, actually I'll get to that, but we have 8 priorities. And then for the levers are what guide or influence all of those priorities. And so you see programmatically, data management, policies and procedures, and then using an equity lens. And then that work, those priorities with those levers are supporting us to get to these intended outcomes of a healthier community engagement, the institutionalization of an equity lens, strengthening our communication, equitable community policing practices, and then a highly diverse workforce. So one thing we just want to call out is that while we have, I don't know if you looked at the plan, but I imagine it may look and feel a little complicated, and one thing that keeps it from being overwhelming for us is that they're all connected and interconnected, right? And so that when we're looking at the outcomes and the priorities that will get us there, there's a lot of overlap and they talk to each other. So we just wanted to highlight that. And then in terms of our methodology, and so part of what is center to our work is creating inclusive processes, incorporating community at all decision levels, and making sure it's not that inviting right to in the beginning and then not stage 2, not stage 3, that is throughout all processes. So that's what centers our work. And you'll just see at the bottom of that full integration, having folks working together around the table. You actually see the little people around the table working collaboratively around together. All right, so I know this is just, not the most entertaining information, and I do hope that quarterly will be able to be much interactive, but I did want to give you an overview of the work. So the REP, I'll give you some highlights. So again, we have the 8 priorities. Prioritize is really about our senior leadership, that this isn't L's plan, EDO's plan, that this is the Bureau's plan led by our senior leadership, right? And so the REP will be prioritized. Recruitment and hiring and retention, that, looking at our recruitment and our backgrounding process and assuring that we're creating a climate to retain good staff. And so that's one of our goals. With leadership development, one thing we realized and recognized is that we wanted to separate and provide the tools and support for our leaders to support frontline staff, right, in their development around this work. So we have leadership development and then ongoing staff development. And then communications and access. So one thing with this work, with equity, we can't move it forward without a communications plan, right? We have to be intentional. It's an area that we want to strengthen and improve, and something we're working on. But we recognize that we have to be intentional in messaging our work. And then access is about engaging and creating access to the work, as well as creating opportunity for our English learning community members, what federally would be our LEP, Limited English Proficient Community Members. And then, of course, stakeholder engagement, as we talked about before. It's just important that our work is centered there, and we will have an example at the end of this to talk about an opportunity to engage. Data management, using data to set goals and develop plans and to track our progress. obviously, and then budget and contracting. The city identified this as a gap and something we want to work on internally as well. So with all of that said, you will note in the plan we have our new version, because we've updated, we went from 57 action items, as if that's not enough, to 61 action items. It is a working document, so you guys are quiet, so you must be as overwhelmed as I am with that number. Okay. And then just wanted to acknowledge, sometimes with the offices, we're trying to push behind the scenes and doing the work, and then also we learn, right? There aren't many counterparts to us nationally doing this work the way we're doing this work. So there's a lot of learning in the work. So some of the things we just wanted to highlight was one thing that we implemented last year was our equity retreat process, which was a way of assessing the work that we had done by engaging community leaders, city leaders, and PPB leaders to set the priority for 2019, because we have to do that, right? Moving 61 action items all at the same time would be difficult, right? If we look at staff development, that we've rolled out trainings within the in-service structure, which is the formal structure of how members are trained. And so we did an adapted internal equity 101 training, implicit bias training, and then procedural justice. And then the other piece that is a huge win for me is that we went from 1 position to 3. All right. And so, some of the challenges is that, this work doesn't move quickly, right? But it's all urgent. And the reality is that because, again, this work isn't being done, it requires us to be innovative. And that innovation takes time, it takes risks, it requires grace. One thing, sometimes we get the question of how can community support this work? And that's something that we'll talk about is, being thinking partners with us, attending, being a part of the focus groups and the meetings and the planning sessions, and bringing that voice is what's most critical, so that voice can be center to all of our work. All right, so we're wrapping it up, guys, I promise. In 2019, some of our focus areas, is one thing that's big is really creating shared language. And so we want to institutionalize the equity lens. So we're in the process of developing it, and then the goal would be to then institutionalize it. We're in the process, as you know, we're having a ton of retirements. And so that means lots of new promotions and lots of movement, right? And not lots of new leadership. And so part of what we want to do is support new leaders by developing an onboarding program. And our goal is to embed equity wherever we can, right? So that expectation and those tools and that awareness is there. And then continue to work with training to embed equity. I'm sure many of us, well, anyway, and so field training officers is where we're piloting the work, and that's just a first step, but that's exciting for us. We know that field trainers can have, outside of the classroom, can have the most impact and influence on our new officers. So we want to make sure we're working with them. And then, of course, do some branding and setting up our communication. This may be the first time you heard of it. We need to increase our presence and have a plan so that there's clear expectations what's going on for us. And that's definitely a goal, something we want to improve. And so announcements and next steps. We're almost there. So if you can keep going, I apologize. So this is our equity training line, a tentative one. We've had to learn as we've grown. It mentioned some of the things that we talked about. But, in response to the implicit bias training, one of the goals or one of the statements or objectives was that, you know, once we're aware of our implicit bias, how do we counter it, right? And that's the conversation. What's the next step? And so part of what we are looking to create is our community trainer project. And so wanted to mention this because we heard two things during our assessment. Sorry, this is a repeat, Lariana, but two things during our assessment. One was that community members wanted to be a part of training our new officers, right? And two, and this was even duplicated in some of the surveys of our strategic plan, is that community members wanted to know or wanted officers to have relationships with community members as they finish the program. You're brand new, that you have relationships. Does that make sense? And so